Star Wars Jedi Power Battles, released in 2001 for the Game Boy Advance courtesy of THQ and developer Hot Gen, is an adaptation of the Jedi Power Battles game that graced the Sony PlayStation and Sega Dreamcast consoles back in 2000. Essentially, an isometric-based hack-and-slash action game where you got to control either young Obi-Wan Kenobi, Qui-Gon Jinn, or young Obi-Wan Kenobi with Sam Jackson's head slapped on and they just called him Mace Windu. Sounds good to me. Anyway, you play through a number of stages based on the various settings of Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, each of which is divided into segments that has aspects of fighting off droids and critters along with the occasional bits of platforming here and there that usually culminates with a boss fight of sorts. Sometimes you'll be charged with rescuing handmaidens and pilots before you can progress onwards. Sometimes you have to protect someone like the Queen or Anakin from harm. You know, escort missions, the best kind of missions, he lied. The Phantom Menace actually had its own video game on the PlayStation and also on the PC, I think. But that's more of an adventure game, or apparently. It's been a while since I last played it, but my understanding is that they made Jedi Power Battles, a name that just rolls off the tongue, mind you, for those wanting more of a straight-up action game, much like the old Super Star Wars games on the Super Nintendo back in the day. Long story short, I'd much rather play Super Star Wars than this for a couple reasons, but it's an option for those who find the actual Phantom Menace game to be a bit plodding. But then again, they made like 100 games for that one fucking movie, so you're bound to find one that appeals to you. I guess, I suppose. I don't know where I was going with that. Anyways, I digress. Back to this GBA port of Jedi Power Battles. So you have 3 characters to choose from. The console versions had 2 others omitted from this version. You do get a code that unlocks Darth Maul as a playable character, and he has the double-sided lightsaber, but it really, I find it doesn't really matter. You know, slight differences here and there. As you clear stages, you'll earn a password to record your progress, basically unlocking stages you could play. And you can replay the stages with different characters if desired and such. It's pretty standard action fare. You run through several segments of a level, fighting off battle droids, navigating obstacles, hazards, and pits. At the end of the level, you're fighting a massively oversized boss that takes forever to kill. Sometimes, kinda sorta depends on the level, because some levels has you rescuing folks before you can progress onwards. Others were escort missions where you kept someone else from harm. These are things that vary up the gameplay, but also deviate from the straight-up action that the game is going for. Hence why I prefer Super Star Wars over this. No escort missions, just full-blown action, and lots of guns, and better platforming. But I'm jumping ahead here, so. You have 3 meters on top, one being your health meter, which is self-explanatory. The other is a block meter. The more you block, the more this fills, and once it's full, blocking is disabled for a period of time. And the last is your force meter, which stores whatever force power you acquire that can be used to pull off special attacks and such. To the game's credit, or this port's credit at least, each of the 3 Jedi have their own unique special attack that you could pull off. They can also deflect saber shots if you time it right. No cool Jedi mind tricks, but that's okay. The focus is on full-blown action, and that's what you get, for the most part. Jedi Power Battles starts off promising. The action is simple and straightforward, controls are tight and responsive, although they flip the buttons so that B is jump, A is attack. Bad. But the game is off on the right foot. This is already better than the new droid army by a wide fucking margin. And then comes the platforming. Jedi Power Battles has some of the more notoriously suspect platforming segments, conceived for the time, and this is where your Jedi starts to struggle a bit. Isometric perspective games don't often make for the best platforming experiences, with a skewed perspective that could potentially mess up your aim. On top of that, your jumps are rather stiff and inflexible, a somewhat high jump covering a short distance. The game does throw you a bone by giving you an air jump that you could, a double jump of sorts, but then fucks you over with droids that will shoot you while airborne or kick you off a platform when you land, causing you to fall into the abyss below. Trying to climb platforms also tends to be a bit of a hassle. It's often a struggle to reach the high ground, and by the way, long drops will kill you instantly. The game has no problem letting you frantically saber your way off a platform and into the abyss below. Fun. Honestly, if there's one sticking point to be had with Jedi Power Battles, it's the game's over-reliance on platforming and your inability to tackle these segments properly. Again, the jumping is too rigid and stiff to feel particularly useful, and the segments themselves don't help matters either. I tend to blame this on attempts to replicate the console versions as much as possible, which is to be expected considering this is a port of said console versions, but even there I always found the platforming to be a bit suspect as well. This is one aspect I felt you could have toned down considerably for the handheld version, or at least fixed the jumping so that I don't know, make them quicker, cover more distance, more controllable. That probably would have made all the difference and made these segments a bit more tolerable, possibly even playable by some people's standards. Oh well, at the very least the game is somewhat generous with its checkpoints. There's occasional pickups to restore your health and grant you extra lives. And while the combat can feel a bit tedious after a while, even when they try to vary up the enemy types from droids to mercenaries to Gungans and stuff like that, at the very least the action is quick-paced and doesn't feel like a total sloth. The boss battles are a pain in the ass like they usually are, but fairly gratifying to conquer. And hey, if you think Jar Jar Binks is the bane of all existence and must be wiped off the face of the earth, he's a boss in this game and you could technically kill him, provided you survive all of this. A password is awarded once you beat a level, and beating the game eventually lets you play as Darth Maul, which isn't as impressive as it sounds, but it's a nice bonus regardless. There's even a shooter level. Simple, horizontal scrolling shooter where you fly a staff, and I think that's what it's called, those droid flying things. And you shoot down other droid things, and it's okay, it's a thing. It's a bit of a break from the usual stuff, I guess. Jedi Power Battles looks about as good as you can get with this style. The characters are smallish and lacking the finer details, but they do animate smoothly and resemble the characters they're supposed to recreate. The set pieces are rather nice looking, somewhat colorful, and do a fine job of recreating the various settings of the film without making them too drab or dull. I do find depth perception to be a bit of an issue. In terms of the level layouts, it's not exactly clear where you're supposed to go, especially during the platforming segments where it's mostly black and you only have a hint of grass in the corner to indicate you're supposed to drop down at times. That's the only real gripe to an otherwise adequate looking game. I will say that having a fade-in, fade-out transition for when you're traversing segments seem a bit much, but then again there's no opening crawl in Jedi Power Battles, so maybe they had a little more space to add a little transition or something between segments of levels and stuff. The sound is somewhat mixed. You have some of the sound effects sampled in and they sound fine for the most part, but the music is dreadfully morbid and dull. To its credit, Jedi Power Battles at least attempts to recreate the Episode 1 soundtrack, one of the finer Star Wars scores with a couple fine tunes in my opinion at least. But the way they're converted here, recreate seems to be a synonym for butcher. These aren't very good to be honest. Fortunately, this is one aspect that would see improvement in subsequent GBA Star Wars games, almost to the detriment of everything else. And that's the key thing. Star Wars Jedi Power Battles is a game that has its issues, primarily involving the spotty platforming segments and the incredibly stiff jumping that is inadequate to handle these properly. This is one aspect of the game that may very well turn away some players. Despite that, however, when you get to the battles portion of the game, Jedi Power Battles does that bit well enough. I mean, the action is fast, the pacing is good, controls are fairly tight minus the stiff jumps. And for a game that was essentially a port of a PlayStation/Sega Dreamcast release, I thought they did a fairly decent job. Maybe if you had toned down the platforming bits and fixed some of the jumping, you probably would have had one of the finer portable outings in regards to Star Wars games. I will say this much though. Jedi Power Battles may border on frustration sometimes, but it is never boring. It may feel cheap at times, but never a waste of time. And given the choice, I'd much rather play Jedi Power Battles on the Game Boy Advance than the new Droid Army.